contributing to all of us who are interested in learning more about resilience and sharing our stories. I'll share a little bit about you. So Dr. Jordan Bell is a psychologist from Adelaide, South Australia. And her practice is focusing on resilience, and that's how we connected over resilience. And I'm super thrilled that you said yes. So thank you for your generosity and for your time.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Yay. You've mentioned that your practice was focused before on students. Would you like to share about that first before we go?
Sure. So my original PhD was looking at educational resilience in students across the lifespan, and I work in a residential college with university students, looking at what are the factors that can, I guess, help them really bounce back from life's challenges and succeed. I think most people would remember from that stage of life when you're possibly newly out of home, trying to work out what to do with your life. It's a very challenging time, and there's lots of hiccups that can hit you along the road. And so having someone to chat with for those students has been really useful in helping them kind of regather themselves, collect their focus, and continue to succeed at university. And so that's been a real joy in my life for many years. But in the last couple of years, I've been looking at the impact that COVID's had on workers, particularly kind of adults who are past that university stage, and really wanting to put some tools out into the world to help and support them with all of the stresses that we've been facing in the last 2 years. And so that's been quite an interesting journey, but the feedback's been fantastic from the people that I've seen when I go into the offices and give these presentations about kind of the biological underpinnings of resilience.
Oh, I'm excited. Thank you. So usually I start with the question, what does resilience mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think most people are really familiar with that idea of resilience as like the bounce in the rubber ball. You know, stressful circumstances may squash you, but you can bounce back into shape with resilience. As an entry point, that's not a bad beginning. It's a good kind of layperson's understanding of resilience, but I like to go a little bit deeper. For me, I think resilience is really an innate human capacity that exists along a spectrum. We see that it varies between people. Some people have higher resilience, some people have lower resilience. I think it's also really important to reflect on the fact that your own resilience can vary within yourself as a single person across different times and at different ages. So resilience, we know, is strongly influenced by the environment, by the circumstances, and by the resources that anybody has to draw upon. But I think, nevertheless, there are always things that people can do to improve their ability to deal with stressful circumstances and continue to engage with the people and the things in their life they really care about. I'd add on one extra thing, which is that it's really important to note, I think most people have a very, very unrealistic idea about what a long-term sustainable level of stress is. People are putting themselves under way too much stress for way too long under the assumption that that's just how it is, that's what everybody does. I actually think people should be focusing on resting and restoring themselves a lot more than they really do if their key concern is resilience.
I love it. So I always look at what are the tools that we could share with others, what helps people be more resilient. And what I'm hearing is also realizing how long-term stress can negatively impact us.
I think long-term stress, also being aware of the fact that I'm not necessarily talking about the extraordinary events of the last couple of years, like just working a full-time job while being a parent, while caring for your own aging parents is stressful. It's important to acknowledge that, and it's important to say to people, you need some downtime from that in the absence of a worldwide pandemic, which is making everything harder than it already was. So people's stress levels are really ratcheted up to here, and I don't know that they're necessarily fully aware of that.
Yeah. How does one become aware?
Well, I think it begins with a bit of an honest appraisal of what we're actually doing. So if you were to imagine telling or having a friend tell you their set of loads, but then applying that lens to yourself. So if you just say, well, I work, a really demanding job under stressful circumstances, I've got to be there probably 8.5 to 9 hours a day. Then I've got to commute back and forward on top of that. those hours. I'm trying to get my daughter into a better kindergarten, but I can't get anyone to return my calls because all the kindergartens are short-staffed because all of the staff have gone out because of COVID. My mum's in a nursing home, but she, these are all hypotheticals that I'm not describing my own circumstances, but for anybody, if you were to really unpack everything that you're dealing with, all the balls you're trying to keep in the air, everything you're juggling, but then try and look at it as if a friend was telling you that. If a friend listed out everything they did and said, and so I just feel really stressed and I don't know why, you wouldn't say to them, oh, it's because you're a lazy good for nothing who is hopeless at everything they do. You'd say, babe, it's because you've got all of this stuff on your plate. Oh my gosh, anybody would be stressed under these circumstances. I think our ability to turn that anybody would be stressed under these circumstances back onto ourselves is really important for that kind of self-appreciation of how much stress we're all carrying.
Self-appreciation of how much stress we are carrying. That's interesting combination. Appreciation of how much stress you're carrying. Like almost self-appreciation.
Because really we're all doing heroic jobs at the moment, right? Like the amount of work that we're all kind of surviving through.
Yeah. So compassion, self-compassion comes to me.
Very
might
important.
Be overused now term, but maybe self-kindness.
Yeah, and I think I always use that description of think about yourself like you would a friend. We would never usually talk to a friend the way the cruel and harsh ways that we often talk to ourselves. And so turning that lens, that generosity that we can offer to somebody else onto ourselves is really important.
Love it. Would there be, well, let me ask you actually a different question because you are one of my guests that actually deals in your professional life with resilience.
Yeah.
What originally brought you to the topic of resilience?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I was probably a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of my concerns in resilience, particularly in Australia. South Australia is now known as the home of wellbeing and resilience in Australia. There's a really fantastic research centre here that focuses exclusively on wellness and resilience. But they were probably set up just towards the end of my PhD. And so I was, a little bit ahead of what everybody else was thinking about here in South Australia. My original focus, like I said, was on educational resilience. I was really interested in what it is that helps, what are the factors that help students really bounce back from challenging situations in their life and continue to be able to proceed in school when we know that there are some children whose lives are so challenging that they get knocked out of the educational system and then it's very hard for them to recover a positive life trajectory. So I think yes, at the time that I was setting up my PhD, I was working with a group of students in a primary school setting who were all struggling with their academics. And I was actually working on an academic program with them. This was before I'd qualified as a psychologist. So I was in the schools in a different context, working on them working on their academic skills and supporting their academic skills and watching as they built those academic skills, how their confidence in other areas flourished. And I was like, I want to look at something around this area. And it distilled down to that educational resilience.
I love it. Also, when you said flourish, I could see the smile on your face. So it looks like your heart and care for others inspired in a way this journey.
Well, that's the gift, really, to see people and walk beside them on this pathway from, really kind of languishing misery through to building up the skills and the life habits and the techniques that mean that they can actually become the best version of themselves that they're able to be.
Yes, thank you. Would there be any personal story that you would be willing and open to share with us?
Yeah, of course. I was thinking about resilience in the context of this and how it's applied to my own life. And I wanted to share a story with you about my daughter. So my daughter Ruby is 8 years old now, and I have her permission to tell this story. She was born with a condition called craniosynostosis, which means that her skull was not developing in the way that it should have after she was born. And it meant that when she was 4 months old, so a tiny baby, she had to have surgery to completely remodel her skull shape so that her brain would actually have room to grow and not be damaged as it grew. The whole process actually lasted several months from her diagnosis at around 2 months old, with us being informed, look, this is a serious problem. This is going to be, the pathway that you go through. So we had a lot of time waiting for her to be actually big enough to survive the surgery, because obviously, tiny babies, very, very vulnerable. Fortunately, she was quite a bonny baby. So she was ready for really strong and ready for the surgery at 4 months old, but still 4 months old is, so little. So we had that long period of kind of foreknowledge that this was coming, and then the surgery itself, and then her recovery, and then thankfully, the regrowth of her skull into a healthy shape that's been supporting her really well as she's been growing. But it was a really intense period, and was my first and only child. So on top of dealing with that, I was always just also up to my elbows in like, how do you have a newborn? How do you be a mum? All of that kind of stuff. So, there was an incredible learning curve as well as this extra stress. And my husband and I were pretty overwhelmed with uncertainty and fear. If you can picture like holding a tiny baby and having to give it over to some surgeons, knowing what to expect, it was really, really stressful. But I do have a really close relationship with my sister and my mum. And the other thing is that we were amazingly lucky to have the best specialist for this surgery living and working in Adelaide, practicing in a hospital that was 10 minutes from our house. So people literally fly to my city from other countries to have this kind of operation, and it was right in our backyard. So for me, like a really huge part of how I got through this stressful time was, number one, through accepting the love and support of my husband and mum and sister. Like, we all really rallied around together to care for each other. And then I also, in retrospect, I realized I developed this kind of unintentional gratitude practice around the whole thing. So, it's hard to think about being grateful for such a huge thing for a little person to go through. But I remember that I just kept saying to people, like, it's not like I wanted this to happen, but given that this is what we're dealing with, we're so fortunate that she has the form of the disease that's easiest to treat. We're so fortunate we live in the same city as the world expert. We're so fortunate this is happening in Australia, which means that the treatment is largely covered by our national medical cover, so we won't go bankrupt paying for it. Just constantly counting my blessings in that way. And because it was a really big thing to go through, but because I was just always focused on, gosh, we're so lucky to have the easiest version of this problem that we could have had, really helped me through the process. And then on the actual day of the surgery, after we handed my daughter over to the anaesthetist and, left the room, walked away, we had 5 hours before we knew whether we'd be able to ever see her again. So my husband had been up worrying the whole night before. So he actually had a great way to manage the hours of the surgery, which is that he was so exhausted, he just fell asleep. And I lay on the bed next to him and I pulled out some comfort reads, and I actually read like Agatha Christie detective stories as a really comforting distraction, because I knew, by the end of the book, the murder would be caught up, all the loose ends would be tied off, there'd probably be a little romance, and there'd be a happy ever after. And for the kind of uncertain and frightened space I was in, that kind of comforting distraction was really perfect. And then after the 5 hours, she came back to us, and everything, has gone perfectly since then. So she's been fine ever since. But yeah, I think it really was the kind of bringing in the love and support from my family, and being so lucky to have that, and that deliberate gratitude practice that I only really recognize in retrospect. That's what I was doing. That was a really winning strategy for me.
And I also see that, how did you say it? The distraction?
Yes, the comforting distraction.
Comforting distraction. I love it.
I think if, like, distraction gets a bit of a bad reputation in psychology sometimes. And it's true that if it's your only coping strategy, it's going to fall short for you. But if you've got, a known period of time in which there's nothing you can possibly do to influence the outcome of what's happening, distraction can be quite helpful.
So comforting and inspiring, maybe, or it sounded like that you picked something that had you knew there was a happy ending to it.
I knew there'd be a happy ending. That's right. It wasn't the time for like a heart-rending misery novel,
Horror. Yeah, I love it. With may I have a few questions?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. You've mentioned family support. And also, because of your profession as a psychologist, what would you say to those people that might not have the family support? What would be for them,
Yes.
the way
Well,
to get it.
the issue that we have, of course, is humans are social animals. So in our evolution over the course of, hundreds of thousands of years, we have existed in groups of people who we've depended on for our survival. So actually for human beings, when they do feel lonely and they do feel isolated, there's a part of the brain that gets activated that is actually an alarm system saying, hey, like you can't actually hunt your own food, bring your own water, build your own fires all by yourself forever. If you don't get a crew around you, it's going to be bad news. So that's where some of that kind of the really strong drive around loneliness and feeling that need for connection that we have. And of course, COVID's made that a lot harder for people with closed borders and not being able to travel. I'm not sure if you're aware of the situation within Australia, but most of the states at different times in Australia have closed their borders to each other. So even if you were only used to being a 45-minute plane flight away from your family or your best friend, suddenly the borders were closed and that was it, you weren't allowed through. So people have really been wrestling with that kind of loneliness. And I think the great thing about that human drive for connection is that it's really flexible. So, for a lot of people, um, family is a great source of that connection. For other people, family might not be available. Family might be a long way away. Family might have passed away. Or, in fact, people might come from a family of origin where those relationships are really difficult and not supportive and not comforting. So, but the powerful thing about the flexibility there is that you can build a found family. So I know we've seen a lot of people, for example, from the queer community over the decades, have built what they've called a found family, where they've said, look, I might have been disowned by my family, but I have found brotherhood and sisterhood in my close and loving friends in the queer community, and we are a family for each other. So that kind of approach to thinking about not who is your necessarily family by blood, but who is your family by heart or by love or by showing up for each other, really leaning into those relationships and being willing to ask for the help that you need, because often we're so frightened to ask,
Yeah.
and people will help where they can.
Thank you.
Mm.
That brings me to another question. What would you say is, you partially already answered it.
Mm.
My question was to ask, what is a great community system or kind of a support system? If it's not a family, then could be
Then what is
friends.
it? Yeah, yeah.
Um, how do people know that there is maybe something different if they are not receiving the support, if
Mm,
there's a
mm,
community, if they never had a great
mm,
community in place
mm.
and they feel lonely or they feel there's no good community for them.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess answers might be slightly different for me in Australia compared to America, because I don't know the American system as well, but I
Mhm.
would be looking at things like organizations. So, for example, in my city, there's a networking organization for professional women.
Mhm.
And so I'm a member of that, and I've made a number of interesting friendships and connections that have developed outside of the networking organization from the people I've met in there. Um, I think for a lot of people, connection to a religious community can be really powerful. And then if there is somebody who's looking for that deeper and wider connection, and they've got a religious community that they might attend synagogue on Shabbat, or they might go to church on Sundays, or they might be going to the mosque just as part of the religious service. Lean into that community and see if there are ways that you can get more involved in what's happening. Because I think the thing that's important about community is you have to be part of it before you need it, almost. So investing that time in to kind of say, yes, look, I'm a member here, you know my face, you know my name, I show up. Then at the point where you need to ring someone up and say, look, I'm going through a really hard time and I really need some help right now, the community is there for you already. It's a bit hard to activate the community at the point where you need it if you don't have it already, if that makes sense.
Yes. So kind of creating really the support system ahead of time and
Yeah, yeah,
intentionally.
yeah. Because we're all going to go through hard times, right? Like even if things are okay at the moment for people, it's worth showing up for others so that they've got the opportunity to show up for you later.
I'm wondering if there's also a cultural difference, because Americans are usually very individualistic and also need to be
ruggedly independent.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Versus some different cultures.
That's almost a kind of a, I feel like it's a little bit too strong to say it's a cultural sickness for Americans, but I think they have taken the needle on independence and swung it too far to a place where humans aren't able to necessarily get those community needs met in that same way. And certainly the research around community that I've seen coming out of America has shown a real fraying of community structure and community support over the last 20 to 30 years. Excuse me.
So really, what I'm hearing from you is a powerful message that part of any resilience are the connections with others, and us recognizing that we are social creatures, and that even if you said that it relates to the part of the brain whenever we are lonely, that it triggers the how would you call
survival
it? Survival instinct.
Yeah, yeah.
And so creates additional stress. So truly the connections, nurturing the connections.
And I think that's can I say one more thing about that? Sorry.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think it's just really really important for people to understand that resilience is not something that just exists inside you and you are resilient or you aren't resilient. Like resilience is an interplay between you and your environment. And if I think about, the example that I gave with getting through my daughter's operation, if I'd had to do that in a setting where I was a single parent with no family support, it would have been so much harder, but because I had the loving bonds of community around me and people prepared to show up with meals or drive me to appointments and that sort of thing, it was much easier to recover from that circumstance.
How was it for you to receive the support?
I think one of the things about an extreme situation like that is it knocks down some of that resistance that people can have to feeling like, oh, I must be in control all the time. I've got to show everyone that I'm strong and I can handle this. Like, again, turning that like loving self-reflecting lens, if you were to say to someone, oh yeah, like I've just had a baby and I've just found out they have to have major surgery, nobody would go, well, you soldier on with that all by yourself, you good, good little girl. Like everybody would go, oh my gosh, what can I do? How can I help? That's terrible. And so being able to actually look at my own situation and go, no, this is like legitimately, absolutely a situation where people will want to help, and then being open to that help was really, really great.
It seems like it was almost natural part of like, yes, accepting that the resistance was lower.
And really, really just understanding that it was an extreme situation and it was okay to have people come in to help for it.
Has it always been easy for you to receive help?
Look, yeah, I'll come clean and say no, it hasn't always. I think I was probably 30 years old before I was able to say the phrase, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? Without like bursting into embarrassed tears of overwhelm. So finding ways to be more open to saying, look, I'm not expected to know everything. I'm not the font of all knowledge. It's okay for me to say, I don't know, or I can't, or help me. And the thing for me that helped with that was practice. So just getting lots and lots of practice at bursting into embarrassed tears, and then less and less and less and less tears happened. So
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that honestly and with courage, because I feel that could help those who are in the stage when they don't want to ask for help. They feel they bother others. They don't want to impose, or they feel ashamed for needing help because they should be independent.
Yeah. And I think that's part of that kind of cultural sickness that I talked about, that we're not designed to be just all on our own out there dealing with all of the problems. We actually exist in a mesh of community, and we're much healthier when we can relax into that mesh and be held by the mesh.
You are bringing a brand new perspective, and I like it almost, because I feel sometimes it's glorifying the independent But you're saying maybe that's if it comes to an extreme, it's actually not healthy. It could be a toxic, or how did you call it? No,
The
toxic
cultural
sickness.
sickness.
Yes.
And
Is not
it's one of the big challenges with resilience work, because a lot of it was developed within the United States. It does have that strong strain of independence and soldiering on and being your best you, and all of those kind of really strong kind of cultural messages that people get. But there is no level of resilience that is going to help you continually survive in a situation where you're really struggling. That any individual feelings that you have, or any individual strength of resilience that you have, will get burned out eventually, and then you need somewhere soft to land. And my fear for America, when I hear and when I read about it, is those soft places to land are very few and far between. And so, yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah. Well, that's why we are having these conversations, for
Yeah,
us
yeah.
to learn and connect with each other, and realize that we all share the humanity in us and the basic needs for connection and community. Thank you. I wanted to go to the next step, which was the gratitude. And has it been something that's been always strong in you, or did it start at the moment?
I don't know. We have this expression in my country that was used by a prime minister a number of years ago about having a dark armband view of history, which is that you might look back at history and see only the bad things and say this was bad and that was bad. And I've always thought about myself as having more of a kind of a rainbow armband of history, which is that I look back and I remember the highlights and the best things. And I actually, my sister gives me a hard time about this all the time, because I forget about a lot of the bad things. Which is not to say like ignorance is bliss, but sometimes there are things that it's just okay to let go of, and to not actually carry around forever, while equally appreciating that for some people a really significant trauma is not something that's ever going to loosen their grip on them, and it's about finding ways to reconfigure and live with that. But for me, at my kind of more moderate level of crummy things that have happened to me in my life, I think I do have that sort of slightly like retrospective rose tinted glasses a little bit. And in terms of actual specific gratitude, like I said, the gratitude practice when my daughter was going into surgery was really unintentional. Like, I only realized in retrospect what I was doing, that I was going, actually counting my blessings all the way through, staying focused on the positive. But having noticed that, and having noticed the impact that it had on me, I have at times built a really deliberate gratitude practice in. You would be familiar with, for example, writing down 3 positive things about the day before you go to bed, and that sort of thing. And there's all kinds of great little apps you can get on your smartphone that are like, they'll ping you and remind you it's time to write down your gratitudes. So I've used that sometimes. I've used a physical book sometimes. And I wouldn't say that I have a concrete gratitude practice right now. But I certainly have leaned on it at times in the past.
Thank you. What about your husband? Was he in a similar space where both of you were feeling the gratitude?
No, I think he tends to process things quite differently to me. We did lean on each other a lot, like it brought us much closer together. But equally, there were times when I was stressed and he was stressed, and we would have a fight, that was not about the dishes or the laundry, but was actually about the fact that our daughter was about to go in for surgery. And so, yeah, we comforted each other, and we tried to support each other as much as possible. But in terms of he works in music and as a DJ, so he's not a psychologist. So, sometimes I can explain things to him and go, try doing it this way, or try thinking about it this way. And sometimes that's useful, and sometimes he's like, yeah, it doesn't work for me. So, yeah.
Probably music might work for him.
Yes, he used a lot of music.
Right. It reminded me of what you shared also, because when difficult situations happen and it looks like there was additional resiliency in your relationship.
Mm.
That the challenging situation with your daughter and the surgery, I cannot even imagine, move you closer together.
Yes, I think it goes one of two ways with a really big event like that. You either
Yeah.
become closer together or it pushes you further apart. So we're lucky we were able to bring our troubles to each other and come together in that way.
What would you say made you resilient as a couple in that sense?
Humor was a really big part of it.
Oh,
My husband's a very funny man, and the laughing together is always really warm. He's also a really kind man, so he shows me a lot of kindness. I show him a lot of kindness. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of the relationship counselors, John and Julie Gottman. They have this fantastic idea of basically the relationship bank that you're investing in. So their kind of what would you say formula for a healthy relationship is you're having at least 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction. You've heard of that one?
yes, yes.
Yeah, so that comes out of the Gottman work. And that was really true for our relationship. So, there was lots of kindness, lots of good humor, lots of gentleness and cuddles. And then the occasional kind of flare up happens and
Yes.
it's balanced out by the good stuff. So
Yes.
yeah.
All right, thank you. So for anybody else who, it sounds like investing in the relationship, not just like the intimate relationship and the community, kind of the community bank, because at the beginning you mentioned giving, like giving forward.
Yeah, well, just even showing up, like giving your
Showing up.
presence,
Yes.
so that people know that you are part of the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So who said it, Wooden Allen, that part of the success, most 80% of the success is showing up?
Showing up. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true for community building as well.
So if somebody doesn't want to engage, just showing up is the best first step. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. And what I'm hearing also, it sounds like a humor could be another resiliency tool for you and your family.
That's true, actually, coming out of this conversation. I wouldn't have necessarily written it down, but yeah, definitely humor, specifically for my husband, is a really big part of his strong resilience mechanism. And not only like, sometimes you can make a joke and laugh at yourself, and that's really healthy, but just also making jokes about anything, like silly things. So yeah, there's lots of silliness and laughing in our house, which is really nice.
Wonderful. And kindness sounds like
Yes.
also.
Yeah, kindness is a really big value for us. So
Yeah. It sounds like you also live aligned with your values, that you're clear about your values.
well, I definitely try, because one of the things I've noticed is that all of the times that I live outside of alignment with my values, I'm very miserable. So having gotten crystal clear on that through a couple of rounds of therapy has just made it really easy to go, well, what do I actually care about? What is my life supposed to be about? I'm going to go in that direction.
Somebody else mentioned actually introspection, or just the pausing and reflecting as part of the resiliency process.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So it sounds like part of the emotional resiliency, if we look at different ways of being resilient, it's probably also self-awareness.
Self-awareness is really useful because it really it grounds your ability to make decisions about yourself and what's good for you and what you're supposed to be doing in the world. But that thing about the pause is really important, because the pause gives you space to choose how you're going to react. So if we're all just like stimulus response, I'm sure, like I can say for myself, when I pop out a response, sometimes it's not always the most helpful or the most generous or the most loving response. Whereas if I can pause for a moment and go, okay, that was provocative, but what's the real problem, and what am I trying to get out of this, rather than just going back to someone. So yeah.
Yes, I know that one. I'm learning to say, I just need to take a minute here.
Give me a minute. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, very important. Very important phrase. Yeah.
So pausing here. Do you have any, like you mentioned you had, or sometimes when you needed kind of a gratitude ritual or practice, And at the beginning of our conversation, you've mentioned how important it is to rest also. And in a way, take the pause. So it could be physical rest, it could be emotional rest. Do you have any practice around taking the pause?
I do actually. I am in the process of going through a course about an introduction to Judaism. So looking at investigating whether that's a pathway for me and whether I might convert to Judaism down the track. But one of the things that is built into that religion that I find so compelling is the rest of Shabbat. And so from sunset on Friday night to sunset on Saturday night, you're not allowed to do any work. Like I was explaining it to a friend and she said, oh, so you're encouraged to rest. And I was like, no, you are religiously obligated to rest. It's a positive commandment to do no work on that day. And, different denominations of Judaism interpret that in different ways. Some people have a very, very strict interpretation of that where they don't cook, they don't mend, they don't read, they don't write. Oh, they can read, sorry, but they don't write. Whereas the more progressive sects interpret it to be take this time out of your life for the things that you don't have time for in the rest of your life. So if you really want to take guitar lessons but you don't have time to practice the guitar, Shabbat is the time you can practice the guitar. If you really want to take your kid to the zoo and you don't usually have time to take your kid to the zoo, Shabbat is the time you can take your kid to the zoo. And I skew a little bit more to that side rather than the very orthodox strict interpretation. But I have to tell you, it has transformed my life having this one day a week that I do no work. Like even to the point I was preparing for our conversation, and I was, wanting to write down a few notes, and I was like, oh well, I can't do that till after sunset on Saturday. So, after the sun went down last night, I was tippity tap tap tap. Okay, here's what I want to think about. But yeah, so that resting practice has been just transformative for me. And I think it's probably not required that one convert to Judaism to take a day a week of rest, but something about the structure and the formality around that and knowing that, Jewish people all over the world are also doing that has been really encouraging for me to make that part of my life.
Yeah, it reminded me of the community aspect that you've mentioned, that we are social creatures.
Yeah.
So when everybody does it, it's like a holiday.
Yeah. Well, if you're doing it just for yourself, it's easy to sell yourself short, right? You can go, oh, I know today's my day of rest, but there's this pressing thing and that pressing thing. But if it's not my day of rest, but it's the day of rest, then you're like, okay, I just got to rest. So yeah, that's been just delightful.
Wow. What would inspire you?
I think I came across a lot of readings and writings last year from different Jewish philosophers and different Jewish thinkers. And again, if we talk about living in line with my values, I was just kept saying, that makes a lot of sense to me. Oh, that's how I look at the world too. Oh, I really like this. And so in January, I connected with the community. There's a progressive synagogue in my town. And so I started, I talked to the rabbi and said, look, can I just come along, see what happens? And she said, yes, you're more than welcome. So I've been going to weekly services and becoming part of the community there. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Now I was just thinking about the food. There they have some delicious food.
Also, the food's pretty good. Yes.
That's so beautiful. I never know what comes out in these conversations.
Yeah, I bet.
A community and time to rest. It also brings up the thought of sometimes, and I've been guilty of that, tendency to, overwork and feel even guilty when I take a rest. So almost having the community is almost relieving us from feeling guilty.
Yeah, well, that, like I said, it's not an encouragement to rest on Shabbat. It's a positive religious obligation. Yes. So it's, you are required to do it. And so when that, you can put the guilt down because you have to do this. And it's brought, so much joy and peace into my life to have this space to just go.
Just take a break. Is your whole family, anybody else in your family?
It's just me at the moment, but potentially, we'll see as it seems to work out for me, whether they go, oh, I might give that a try too. Yeah.
Thank you. So there's, even if only one out of the couple, let's say for other people who are watching, they can always find their community. There's always some community that they can
That's
connect
right.
to.
Yeah.
And it sounds
Yeah.
like would help you find this community where your clarity of your values and what's
It's very
resonating.
values driven. Yeah. Very values driven. Mm.
So maybe for anybody who's watching and who would like to connect to a new community, what would be some questions that they could ask themselves to find the right
Well,
community?
yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think it's probably to do with what do I care about in the world? What would I be willing to put my time into if it was up to me? And so for some people, that might be around serving the environment. And there are lots of environmental action groups and environmental charities and environmental organizations people can get involved in. For some, it's around social justice. And so there are so many social justice organizations that, need new members, need new input, need new ideas, need arms and legs on the ground. For some people, it might be around caring for animals. And so turning up at a shelter and taking the dogs for a walk and getting to know the people who do that. For some people, it might be working with the next generation. And so getting involved with, helping children to learn how to read or, whatever it is that makes you come alive, that you really care about. If you find other people who care about that too, you're already 2 steps ahead of the curve in terms of being able to connect with them because you all care about the same thing.
I love it. So already having something in common. And I love how you said what makes you feel alive.
Yes. Yeah.
So having that happiness almost as
Yeah, or that
the guy.
it's not necessarily that it's a happiness, but that it motivates you, right? Like it's hard to get up and go to a new place. It's scary to meet new people, but if you're like, you know, but I really care about this happening, I really want to be part of this in the world, that gives you that motivation to go, go over that hump that you have to go over to get to the new place.
So find something that is bigger than us. Some cause could be.
You got it. Connecting with something that's bigger than ourselves is a really huge part of resilience practice. And for some people, that they find that in religion, and for some people now in our more secular society, they don't find that in religion, but they can find it in something else that's bigger than us. So,
like the environmental causes, let's say, when
yeah,
people go and clean up the beaches in my
yeah,
area, let's say.
exactly.
Beautiful. The last point of the comforting distractions. What would be some perhaps some of your favorites? And I will stick with that question first.
Yeah, sure. So books have always been a really huge part of my life. So reading is a big one for me. And because there are so many great books out there in the world, I don't get a chance to reread them a lot. But if I had, some particular favorites and I knew I was going to go through a tough time, it would be good to go back to those favorites because, I already know what I'm going to get. I know that it's just, there's no surprises. I know the ending and I can just enjoy the journey of being kind of taken out of myself on that reading journey. And other people I know, not so much for me, but for other people, have a similar kind of, they call it a comfort watch. So it's a TV series that they might have watched 3 or 4 or 5 times. They know all the characters, they know all the episodes, but having that familiar thing on is, just taking them out of themselves in that time when they're feeling really distressed. And then there are activities that are quite soothing, I guess I would say, repetitive and soothing. So for some people, it's something like sewing or knitting. That is your hands are busy. You have to keep 3/4 of your mind on what you're doing so you don't make a stitch in the wrong place or use the wrong color or anything like that. And the repetitive motion can be really good for some people as well. So just, it's if it's sewing, it's like in and out and in and out. And that feedback to the body is quite restful.
Oh, interesting. So would exercise be part of that too?
I think some people definitely use exercise as part of their resilience toolkit. I don't know. Certainly for myself, I wouldn't use it as a distraction because while my body is moving, my brain is still.
Yes.
But I gather it does work differently for some people as well, and that they can get into that exercise zone where they're just running and running and running and just letting the world stream through them without having much kind of brain chatter. And then that could be a distraction in that way too.
It sounds like for you, it's what really resonates is something that takes your mind off of that and through the reading or
that's moving. Right. Yeah. And that's the distraction part of it, that it's, it gives me something, gives my brain something to chew on. That's not what's going to happen at the end of the operation, what's going to happen at the end of the operation, over and over again. Yeah.
It sounds almost it's giving yourself also a break at that moment.
Yes.
It's like a comfort blanket.
Yes. Yeah. And it is so exhausting to have anxiety running on a loop in your brain. And so getting a break from that anxiety can be really restful.
What would you say is the boundary between when we overuse that comfort?
I'd say number one, that you want to have, like I said, more than just that one strategy. Like it is a coping strategy. If it's your only coping strategy, it's going to fall short for you. And then is it a case that that you're turning to comforting distraction in lieu of times when you could actually be taking positive action to support yourself? So in the example that I used, I had a 5-hour block of time where nothing I did would change the outcome of the operation. There was no action that I could take that would make things better. We'd already lined up the best possible scenario and I just had to wait. That's a perfect opportunity for that distraction because there's nothing you can do. But if people find that they're, for example, if you think about someone who is looking for a job, looking for a job is like backbreaking, soul-destroying kind of labor, depending on where and when you're looking. And from time to time, people would need a comforting distraction from the labor of that. But if then they were turning every night to watching 5 episodes of the TV show instead of writing resumes or looking for new vacancies or polishing letters or reaching out to mentors or any of those kind of positive forward motion steps you could take, then that would be counterproductive. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So what I'm hearing is the balance and also being able still to take the action steps, the positive forward movement steps.
Yeah. Everybody needs a time to just go, oh, and collapse in a little heap. But if all you're doing is feeling good while you're collapsed in a heap, then you're not going to get anywhere further forward. Yeah.
Any final words? Thank you so much. I truly enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, no, this has been lovely. I guess, look, I would love it if people could take away from this the idea that resilience is not something that just exists inside them, that actually resilience is an environmental and a community experience, and that people will come to different places and stages of resilience at different times in their life, depending on what are the environmental factors and the resources that they have access to at that time.
All right, thank you. How people can reach you if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah, sure. I'm on LinkedIn, as you know. That's how we connected. And I also have a website called resilientbrain.com. So if people want to reach out to me through LinkedIn, I'm always happy to answer messages, or my